Hi, I'm the Board Game Bandit, and this is Living the Lifestyle, where we talk about things you encounter when you're a gamer. What's it like to be a gamer on a day-to-day basis? I have with me two special guests. I have Dara, Russ, and Justin Davis. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And today we're going to be talking about regrets. This is a particularly fun topic for me because so much about being a gamer is involved in the art of building your collection. There are some great stories. I have some very memorable acquisitions. And I was thinking recently about the times where I completely got it wrong. Games that I regret buying or had the chance to buy but didn't. This is inspired by a recent article I did on games to try before you buy, where one of those games I was so certain I was going to like, but for various reasons I didn't purchase it, and I tried it on digital form and I hated it. Very surprised by how much I didn't like it. That's a near miss for me. A game where I really thought I was going to buy it, but for whatever reason I didn't, and now after the fact, I'm glad that I didn't. Have any of you felt similarly about any games?
Most recently, I would say Dragon and Flagon, just because it's one that visually appealed to me. The programming games I've come to like a lot after Mix versus Minions, but then one of my friends bought it and we played it and it just didn't come through for me. The player turns, people took too long choosing their cards, and by the time the programming was enacted, it was just complete chaos, and to the extent that I didn't enjoy it.
Do you like programming games?
I think so. I only say I think so because I really love Mix versus Minions, and I think part of what I love about that is it's cooperative, and so when your programming ruins someone else's, it's not intentional and it's not as frustrating, and also that game continuously gives you minions to fight so that by the time it's your turn there's still something for you to do, whereas in other programming games it might be more frustrating, especially competitively.
Yeah, I know there's one particular game that Justin's roommate, if you just say the name of the game, his blood pressure will rise, and that's Robo Rally.
I also am not the biggest fan of Robo Rally for the same reason. I think programming games in general are probably not for me, but I will say a near miss for me that is very recent actually is Targi. I'm a huge worker placement fan, probably my favorite mechanic in a board game. And this one definitely kind of flew under the radar, a little bit smaller box, 2-player game. And it's been out of print for quite a while. The expansion has actually not been done in English at the moment, but it's finally I got a chance to play it. I noticed it was on Board Game Arena. Played a game there, and it was very underwhelming. It was good. I would definitely enjoy it if it was probably like a $15 game, but to pay $50 for an out of print game that was underwhelming, I consider that a near miss for sure. And even further so, it's actually, I believe Cosmos is reprinting it next year in the spring. So it's going to be a lot cheaper next year. So yeah, definitely near miss there.
Particularly if a game is out of print, you have to be very careful because you could end up overpaying for something that is either going to be in the market and thus destroying your value that you've invested, or you may decide that it wasn't worth it. Even if you like the game, it may not be worth the price that you paid for it. I mean, one of my near misses is a game I actually like, but one that I'm glad I didn't purchase, and that's Battlestar Galactica. This sat on my wish list for several years. I'm a big fan of the show. The game was a little bit long for me, which is probably why I never bought it, and I wasn't sure who I would play with because I did not know many people who liked the show. Fortunately, I have a friend who is a big fan of the game and tries to bring it out as often as possible. Even then, I still have rare opportunities to play it because I don't have time to play, a multi-hour game very often. But I know that there is no reason for that game to be in my collection because I have friends who have the game as well.
I just want to say that you can play Battlestar Galactica exactly 4 more times with me this year because it's in my 10x10. And I love that game, but I agree you don't need it if you have friends who already have it in their collection, especially because I think you need some of the expansions for it to really be optimally enjoyable, and then you are just buying more and more things, and if someone else already has it, that's pretty much why I don't have that many near misses. That's why I don't have that many near misses lately, is because I've learned to not reproduce what other people in my friend group have in their collection. So I'll just wait until someone else buys something and then I'll decide if I like it or not. And usually I won't get it. Even if I do like it, I'll just try to convince somebody who lives closer to me or hangs out with me more to buy it as well.
So you mentioned expansions. I would think that expansions are rife with opportunity to be near misses.
I've pretty much stopped buying expansions because I realize most of the games that I enjoy I enjoy for the exact amount of complexity that they have. Like, I enjoy a game for it being accessible, and then adding expansions, usually I have to re-explain the base game to people if nobody's played it before, and then in addition to that I have more convoluted rules. So very rarely do I buy expansions anymore.
Any specific examples of that?
For me, I would say Splendor is a game that I love. It's easy to teach. People just seem to pick it up very quickly. So I was really excited to hear about Cities of Splendor, something to make this game a little bit deeper, especially something modular. There's 4 different modules that you can throw into it. And I consider that a near miss because after seeing a little bit more, do some research on it, watching some reviews, I think that it would probably never actually hit the table, because the beauty of Splendor is in its elegance, how simple it is to get to the table and teach. And all that would go away with Cities of Splendor.
That game should not have an expansion. Splendor is perfect the way it is. I consider it to be a closed game. This is long before there was even talk of an expansion. When I first played Splendor, I thought, wow, this is an example of a game that did everything it was supposed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. I had no idea how you could possibly expand it. And, you know, I've been proven wrong before, and I'm perfectly happy to admit when I'm wrong. But I read the rule book for Cities of Splendor, and I'm like, wow, I am never buying this. So, you know, that's a near miss for you. For me, it's a no-brainer miss.
My favorite expansion of Splendor is Century Spice Road.
Now, I think that there was an expansion for Splendor, or at least there was some talk of adding in more noble tiles, just because there were certain colors that were underrepresented. That's fine. You know, you could put those in the box and people wouldn't even notice.
I do appreciate expansions that are just more content lately than I do things that add more mechanisms, such as Mysterium expansions. They're purely, well, the first expansion, at least, I'm not sure about the second expansion, is purely just adding more content, more cards for people to see. And for me, that's perfect. It makes more variability when you play the game, but it doesn't add anything new or overly complicated to explain to people who are new to the game.
So, you're mentioning Mysterium reminded me of Deception for a near miss. There's a couple of promo packs for Deception that are really expensive. I bought one of them because it actually added a different role, but the other ones just added a couple of red cards and a couple of blue cards. And I'm like, great, yeah, that's more choices for Deception. But I started to think about it, and they do not work well with each other because they stand out so much that no one would ever pick them. And you're talking about, you know, maybe $10 for 7 or 8 cards. That is not a good price point ratio when I got all of Deception for $30. So I'm pretty glad I didn't buy most of the expansions for Deception. Even then, they can't even call them expansions because they're just promo packs. And normally, that's what I like in a game. Just more cards, no additional complexity or explanation. But that one, I'm glad I didn't actually pull the trigger on. Any other near misses? I will say that sometimes you have to be very careful about buying specific editions of a game. Dara actually pointed out to me how antiquated my version of Pandemic is, and that's okay. I bought Pandemic pretty much when it first came out. I've got a very old edition that doesn't have some of the streamlined powers, and characters aren't as big. That's not to say that I regret it. You know, yes, I would have liked to have had, you know, the 7th role and everyone having their full. So I think you said that the operations expert couldn't move between research stations. That's something that was added later on. I don't regret that, but, you know, maybe it would have been better had I waited a little bit. And it's something to think about from time to time. Is this the final form of the game? Let's move on to something more fun. What's a game you absolutely regret buying?
We all just shout answers at once because we're adamant about it.
Sure, let's go with that.
Arkham Horror.
Why would...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're not allowed to say that game.
All right.
Why would you buy Arkham Horror?
Because I'd first started into the hobby, and actually that is pretty much all of the games that I have listed as regrets are games that I bought when I first brand new into the hobby, and a lot of them were decisions made on other people's wishes. My friend was like, I really want to play this game. I'm like, sure, I'll spend $70-some on a game without researching it because I'm a good friend, and we played it half a time together, and it has just been a very expensive paperweight.
For those not familiar with the game, the current player count is 1 to 8. The playing time on Board Game Geek is listed as 120 to 360 minutes. That's 6 hours. And I've been told that that's a lie, that it might actually be more. and that the weight is 3.55 out of 5. That's extremely high for a game.
Just the amount of table space that board takes up is insane, and I cannot believe that there are expansions that add more stuff. But that's also speaking to what you were talking about earlier with waiting for the final form of a game. That is a theme that is in so many different games, and recently of note is Arkham Horror, the card game, which I absolutely love, and I wish I could exchange Arkham Horror for expansions to the card game because I enjoy it so much more. It takes so much less time, and it takes up so much less table space, and it actually hits the table.
I've also heard that Eldritch Horror and Elder Sign do the same thing, that it's kind of streamlined the Arkham Horror version.
I haven't played Eldritch Horror. I have played Elder Sign. Elder Sign is definitely better in game length than Arkham Horror, but what isn't? It has a lot of dice rolling, if I recall correctly. I still think that the card game is definitely what I would recommend over any of the other previous games.
So what about you, Justin? What's your regret?
I have several, but Century Spice Road's probably my most recent.
Just shaking in dismay and disagreement.
The entire time I'm playing that game, I wish I was playing Splendor instead. Not that Splendor is the best game in the world, but it is not a Splendor killer like everybody says.
We need to talk about that offline, because the whole concept of killing Splendor, a game that is selling extremely well and very regarded, makes no sense to me.
I think Splendor
Agreed.
killed itself by downgrading the components.
So Century Spice Road.
It's raw cube conversion. There's nothing else to it, and it's not pretty to look at. Well, I guess some of the art is kind of nice, especially in the Gollum edition, but the actual cubes, I mean, you're literally just converting cubes. Not a whole lot of player interaction, and then sometimes they can flip over one of those contract cards that it's just exactly what they need with that's a high point value. I don't know, it's kind of hard to put my head around it, but it just, as I'm playing, I just wish this was Splendor.
I disagree with you. You do not feel that way. I think that you're not playing with the right group, but you probably still wouldn't like it as much as you like Splendor because you are obviously in love with Splendor. But player interaction, I think, is a lot more in Century Spice Road than in Splendor, because you can see more easily which cards people are going for by what they are collecting and what upgrades they're making. And a lot of the game when I play with my friends is watching other people, knowing the turn order, knowing I could claim that card right now, but nobody could possibly get it before I could. So I'm just going to hold off and annoy everybody so that they have to try to waste their resources to get that card. And then when they're close to it, I'll just take that card. Or I'll wait until that card gets farther up on the queue and also has a bonus coin with it.
To Justin's point, you just described Splendor without the annoying people part.
No.
I agree with you completely, and that's something I don't like, is that whenever I see that someone's about to get this high point card, they're 1 or 2 cubes away, and I know that I can't catch them. They're 1 or 2 turns from getting it. I'm at least 3 turns away. So as long as they stay 1 step ahead of me, I have no incentive in going after that color, because if they do take that out from underneath me, then I'm left with some cubes that I may not need for other stuff. So I feel like in Splendor, being able to reserve a card that's completely unexpected just to keep somebody from scoring in this 5-pointer card is crucial sometimes. So.
Well, I also enjoy the engine building part of Century, and sometimes that's luck of the draw. Sometimes that's knowing when to spend more resources to get a card you really want and knowing what to specialize in. So I just feel like there's a lot more variety to me. And also when I play Splendor, I feel like the person who gets 15 points first is usually the person who wins. Very rarely, in my personal experience, has it been where somebody on their final turn can overcome that. Whereas the point outcome in Century is more of a guess. Like I don't mathematically keep track of who scores which points, and I can feel like I'm far behind, and then it ends up I'm winning actually. So
the big takeaway here is that Justin and Dara need to play Century Spice Road, and Dara and I need to play Splendor. My regret, I have several regrets. Fortunately, I pride myself on being very thrifty when it comes to game. I don't like to spend a lot of money, but this was my first miss. And the funny thing about making this list is how much my regrets of things that I did buy tie in to the fact of things that I did not buy and how related those two things are. Because the thing I regret most not buying was directly caused by something that I regret buying. And it's a game most people probably don't know. It's called Alibi. It's an older deduction game. It came out in 1993. and it was published by Mayfair. I bought it in 2011, and I bought it for a deduction-themed game night I was having. I felt like I needed another deduction game. I love that as a theme. It's something that can be really hard to do. When people think deduction, they typically think Clue. Or when you're trying to explain deduction to someone, usually start with, it's like Clue, but better. Clue is better than this game. And the thing is, I actually knew that because at Board Game Geek, I remember looking it up, and I want to say that it was in the 5,000 range in 2011. As of today, it is number 13,167 with an average rating of 5.44 and 628 normal votes. Now, I don't always put a whole lot of stock in these numbers. There are some great games I enjoy that have a really low number of votes that people just don't know about. But I knew at the time that this was probably not going to be a good game. And I still spent about $25 on it. And this is the type of game where if I just read the rulebook, I would know that this game is terrible. First off, it's a deduction game for up to 10 people. Now, the Resistance is a deduction game for up to 10 people, but that's teams. 10 people should probably never play a competitive game. But what really stood out about this game was that it comes with 25 sheets, like Clue. That's right, 25 sheets for a 10-player game. That should have set me off right then and there. But in terms of scoring points, there is this concept called melding. It plays pretty much exactly like Mr. the Abbey in terms of you have cards in your hand, you ask a question, and you pass cards. But they introduced this concept of melding, which basically says if you can prove that it's not something, kind of like Mr. the Abbey, although Mr. the Abbey is more of a guess. If you can prove that something is not possibly the culprit, you can reveal those cards and score points. And they give you a point sheet depending on whether or not it was done on the first, second, or third turn. That's right, if you can prove it on the first turn. In other words, if cards were randomly dealt out to you, you can gain points during the game in a deduction game. And believe it or not, this has happened in both games that I played of Alibi, where I don't even remember who won. I just remember thinking it's frustrating that the game hasn't even started yet, and I'm already losing. That's just ridiculous. And the reason why I regret this game so much, $25 does not seem like a lot, although board gaming is a luxury hobby. We don't need to buy games. Sometimes we just do because it's fun. It's the game I passed up instead, and that's Mystery Express. I recently came across my old Amazon wish list with a comment that said, "This game is cheaper in Cool Stuff Inc., but I don't want to spend $100 on it." I had a chance to buy Mystery Express when it was about $45 to $50. Years later, I got it as my first anniversary gift, and my wife probably spent $200 on it. So I could have paid a little bit more for a game that I absolutely love. Instead, I went with a game that is absolutely terrible. What was I thinking?
Will that always stay in your collection as like a lesson learned?
It's so small. I don't even like to get rid of games. I've gotten rid of one game over the course of my life, but it's so small that it's hard. Like, what do I say by getting rid of it? I could put another small game.
You say face.
I've tried to find someone. Will someone else like this? And can I give it away to someone for free?
But you can only play it half of a time now, right? Because you've played it twice and there were 25 sheets.
I have not played
Am I
it.
doing the math right?
I have not played it with two 10-player. I did play it with 10
okay.
players the first time, and that was a mess. But I also have some sheets left, and you can photocopy them, and you could always order more. And the part that I forgot to highlight in all of this was that my favorite game at the time was Settlers of Catan, and that was made by Mayfair. And I'm thinking to myself, it's Mayfair. They made Catan. What could possibly go wrong? Famous last words.
So you want some more regrets? I've got a list here.
Yeah, I want to hear about these.
My other one would be, one of the other ones would be Carnival Zombie, just because that was a $99 game, which I think they did a Kickstarter to reissue it, but with minis. I don't know. I didn't follow up with that because I was just kind of bitter because I've already spent $99 on some cubes. But just in terms of value, I think it's the price. I've played it maybe, I 3 times, and it's one of the first games that I bought. So that's less than once a year probably. And it's just every time I play it, I have to relearn the rules and the conditions for winning. It's just too much. It's not intuitive for me. And it's something that back when I was just watching a lot of review videos and it came up on like a top 10 list, and I'm like, sure, I'll take your opinion at face value. That must be a really good game. And I spent $99 on it. And I am determined though that I will continue play it until I enjoy it. $99 worth.
Justin, have you ever spent $99 on a game?
Yes. But in my opinion, it was very well worth it.
Okay.
It was the anniversary edition of Puerto Rico, so I'm okay
once
with
you
that.
said yes and it was worth it, I figured it was going to be that. The most I've ever spent on a game is $42.49, and it was Mysterium. And I was nervous about spending that, but I really enjoy Mysterium, and it's worth it. That game is very accessible. I can teach it to a lot of people. I would never spend $100 on something unless I absolutely loved it.
I spent $200 on the deluxe edition of Takenoko, and I do not regret it. Those pieces are giant. Why wouldn't you pay that for a giant panda? It was my birthday gift to myself. Don't give me that look.
I was actually very close to wanting to spend $200 on Codex because I am a completionist, and I realize there's the beginner set and the core set, which are that's the base game. It's $20, $30, $40. But if you want all the expansions that they come out with so far and just all inclusive, then it's $200. And some people said that that's high for a game, but if you add up the prices that you spend on all your Dominion games, I'm sure you're breaking $200, but at least close anyway. So,
but I already knew Dominion was my favorite game. Like
exactly. Yeah.
So,
and it would be very hard. Like it's hard for me to want to just buy the beginner set because I feel like I know I would love it, and then I would wish I had the deluxe set that was all of it. And so I actually put this under my near misses. I decided not to get it, not just for the cost issue, but it's also it would be very difficult to get to the table. It's a very steep learning curve. But I've always wanted something that resembles a very all-inclusive version of Magic the Gathering that kind of has that same feel, but isn't a collectible card game. And so I ended up going towards Allegiance instead. But Codex is something that I avoided just purely because it's $200.
You mentioned deluxe editions, and we're totally going to come back to that because I didn't think of that for this. But there are some interesting regrets or non-regrets and some ambivalences there. Any other games that you regret buying?
Level 7 Omega Protocol, because it has not hit the table. I've spent more time painting the miniatures than I have looking at the rulebook. It's going to come to the table. I'm going to make it happen. Tail Feathers, which is a Plat Hat Games, and I would probably not regret it so much except for I'm still not finished with Mice and Mystics, and I still have 2 more expansions to go through. So, like, when am I ever going to play Tail Feathers, which is also less easy to get to the table, requires more space. And then in addition to that, they just announced Stuffed Fables, and I'm like, I could entirely skip this game because I'm going to want Stuffed Fables. So yeah, Tail Feathers, that might end up leaving my collection before I play it, unless I don't know, have some kids who want to play.
The availability to bring a game to a table is really important. If there's something that is going to be a common theme in a lot of these, it's going to be that. If you talk about games I've owned for a long time and haven't played, it's Power Grid. Now, Power Grid is a very reputable game, and I'm sure that when I play it, I'm going to enjoy it. But right now, that is a sunk cost, and it takes up a lot of space, which is a big issue for me in my layout in my house. So, why did I purchase it? If you take Power Grid plus Alibi, that's Mystery Express in terms of cost. I could have bought a game that I really enjoyed. There was no point to me buying Power Grid. I'm not saying I regret it yet. I would say that I regret purchasing it at that time. Another game that I may have bought the wrong edition of is Snowtails. And this is a game that I played with Justin recently. I know he enjoys the game. I'm just not feeling it at this time. And, specifically, you said that there is another edition that doesn't have the speed limits, which I think really hurts the game. And, it's a racing game where you're throttling your speed that does not seem to make any sense.
That actually was going to make my list as well. I only didn't add it because I didn't want you to be offended since you own the game as well. But I'm actually selling Snowtails from our last experience. I thought it was great. The speed limits didn't bother me at all. The only reason I got that game was I just wanted to have a racing game in my collection. And about all the ones that I looked at, it just seemed like it would be the most fun. And I like the theme a lot. However, I'm considering Jamaica a racing game, and that's all that I need for now. So I am actually also regretting Snowtails. So I'm with you on that. Although I will strongly disagree with Power Grid. I think that game has hit our table more than almost every game in our collection. And I think once you get it to the table, it's very easy for people to get hooked on that game. So hopefully that changes for you. But I actually have a few more regrets real quick. I'll just run through my list. I love party games. I just like games that people can be creative and, you know, just laugh a lot. Telestrations, everyone online said that was one of their favorite party games. And so I just went ahead and just bought it. I didn't realize it was something that you can just grab a few sheets of paper and a pen and just play it. And I've actually played it before. I didn't realize exactly what the game was. I regret having that physical 12-player party pack because it takes up so much space. So,
at least you bought the 12-player pack. I'm not a fan of Telestrations, but I know many people who have bought the 6-pack or the 8-pack only to discover there's a 12-pack.
I like Telestrations, but I consider it more of an activity. It's something when I play it, nobody ever keeps score.
Yeah, score, and that's something else about it. There's no scoring for the most part. Even the rule book says that. So yeah, I definitely regret that. A couple of the things, I mentioned this in another episode, is I thought I would love Trois. So actually, I thought so much I would enjoy this game because it's so highly regarded as a Euro that I actually bought the expansion at the same time. I only played it once, and I just could barely get through it because the theme was so thin. So I very much regret buying those games. And the last thing is Fleet, which is a card game about fishing. And I love fishing, and it seems like a kind of a Euro style card game with, you know, cubes as you're catching your fish. I couldn't even make it through those rule books because the rule book was so bad, and the game turned out to be very boring. So I just immediately regret that decision as well.
You're speaking of regretting certain editions. I would like to regret a game purchase that someone else made. I would like to regret that our friend John bought the second edition of Fury of Dracula because that probably ruined Fury of Dracula for you, which should not take 6+ hours and which should not be a game that I literally leave the table and go to sleep during because Fury of Dracula is a good game. You usually should take about 3 hours maximum.
From what I've been reading, I think Fury of Dracula regrets Fury of Dracula second edition. That's why they made the third.
I mean, just that you can have turns where you roll for movement and you completely lose your action of movement because you rolled an X. I think that happened to me half of the game, and I will never play that edition again. And I had already, at least I had played the third edition first. If that had been my first exposure, I would never have played that game again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. An edition that I may have gotten wrong is Machi Koro, although I'm not sure how I feel about it because I love Machi Koro for what it is. I'm a stack-based person, and I like the idea of buying exactly what I want. The expansions, however, add them in a line, and they completely undo. If you want to talk about expansions that change what you like about a game, the Harbor expansion takes all the cards and shuffles them together and puts them into a line where they form mini stacks as long as they come out continuously. That completely changes the game for me, but at the same time, I would want more of the variability. And there's also a deluxe edition, and I found out about the deluxe edition literally the day that the package arrived, and it's like, why did I just buy this? You know, I could have gotten more content. Now, then again, I probably would play the game differently, which I'm not sure how I feel about anyway. You know, just changing what the designer had in mind. They generally don't do that, right or wrong, but it definitely makes me wonder, you know, if I had done a little bit more research, would I have walked away with a different product?
I actually bought the deluxe edition, but have not played with the expansions. I have difficulty with expansions usually. I regret buying almost every expansion that I've bought. I just never hits the table for me because I'm always having to explain the core mechanics to someone. Another example of that is Takenoko, which I don't regret buying the $200 expansion. I mean, deluxe edition, but I will not buy the, I think, $100 expansion deluxe version of it because the regular expansion does not hit the table, and thematically it does not make sense that they would be having so many baby pandas.
So speaking of expansions, let's move on to games I regret not buying, because this game I regret, well actually these couple of games I regret not buying the expansions when I had the chance. And the first one is Nightfall. Nightfall is a deck building game that not a lot of players know about. It's kind of convoluted to explain. It's one of the famous times I've actually had to reboot a game for completely misunderstanding how I read the rulebook. But once you understand how to play, and fortunately there's an iOS app if anyone's interested to learn how to play the game is awesome, and it lends itself to expansions so well. However, the problem was I really liked Nightfall. No one else did. So why am I going to invest in expansions? As it turns out, they got really rare very quickly. And I actually ended up figuring out where to get them. I got most of them. I did not get the Eastern Skies super rare expansion, which is unfortunate because that one is the most interesting one. Nightfall is a game where you chain cards together by matching colors, and each card has different colors that can be added to the chain. Eastern Skies adds a brilliant mechanic where cards now take effect where they're put in the chain. It's sort of like it becomes an instant in Magic. Really great idea. It's the only one I don't have. It's so rare you can't even find it anywhere. I ended up coming across them while looking for another expansion, and that's Dominion Cornucopia, a game that I knew I liked. I just was buying them one by one, and for whatever reason, I waited on Cornucopia. And I'm not really sure why. I had the money to buy it, I just chose not to. And then that was the one expansion that they said, yeah, we're deprecating that and we're not producing it anymore. They did eventually release the Cornucopia and Guilds combined expansion in the bigger box, but I already have Dominion Guilds. And if I feel like if I buy the combined set, it means that I was a fan after the fact, when in fact I was a fan while the game was in progress. So I went to great lengths to hunt down an actual Cornucopia original copy. And in doing so, the company that I got it from actually also had a bunch of the Nightfall expansions. So fortunately, I was able to correct several mistakes in one fell swoop. But I probably paid more than I should have. I paid more for Dominion Cornucopia than I paid for Dominion, which should never happen with an expansion. But it is what it is.
Sounds like one of the most hipster things I've ever heard in the context of board games. Like, I've got to make sure everyone knows I like this game before it came out together. I've only got like one game I could think of that I regret not buying, and I really don't regret it that strongly. And that was Arboretum, just because it's a very small card game. There's talk that there's going to be a reprint, so I think that I'm pretty confident I'll get a copy of it. And it's hard for me to feel like regret about not buying pretty much any game because I have so many games that don't hit the table. It's like, yes, I could have this gorgeous game that I enjoyed playing the one time that I played it. But, I mean, what am I really missing? I play games way too often. I have way too many games to play. My friends have too many games to play. So I don't really feel very urgently like any regret for not buying games.
Arboretum's actually on my wish list, and I'm very happy to hear that they're reprinting it because I've heard great things about that game.
Yeah, there's not been last I checked, there wasn't a date set for when it's reprinted, but the only reason that came up to mind as something I regretted is because I literally had it in my hand at the game store, and I was like, I'll wait, and I put it down, and then one of my friends actually bought that exact copy, which was like the last copy at the store, and then I guess maybe the Shut Up and Sit Down review got really widespread attention, and it was just gone.
I get that's different from an expansion, but with Mystery Express, I really like deduction. I also love the idea of murder on a train. It's just a fascinating theme to me. I remember Paper Mario 2 World 6 has a murder on a train that you need to solve, and I remember very little about that game several years ago, but I remember that. And you know, as it turns out, the designer of that game was actually Antoine Bauza, who has done a number of games that I enjoy.
Deluxe Takenoko?
I prefer Takedo, but he was not as well known at the time. And so, you know, if I had known that he was going to be this great designer, I would have trusted it. A lot of people don't like Mystery Express for exactly the same reasons that I do enjoy it. First off, there's almost like a mini game of sorts that is the time puzzle that just seems out of place with the rest of the game, and you solve it completely independently of any information you've acquired over the course of the game.
That's actually my favorite part of the game.
That's one of my favorite too, because I like the idea of having to get better at that each time you play the game, and knowing that if you're good in that one aspect, you know, that makes less pressure on the rest of the game, which is really difficult. Mystery Express is a different type of deduction game where there are 2 copies of every card. So you need to see it twice in the same turn, and this leads to agonizing turn decisions. As a matter of fact, one of the things you can do on your turn is you could flush someone's discard pile and obfuscate what cards you've actually seen. And I think because it's so complicated and so brainy that turned people off. But I just wish I had bought it when I had the chance. I could have been playing that for years, only having just gotten it recently. I'm very thankful that my wife got it for me, even though she paid a small fortune for it. I never bring that game anywhere because it's so rare. I'm so terrified of something happening to it. I would have gotten a lot more mileage if I had purchased it, back when I had the chance.
My favorite part of that game was winning, even though I was the least, or because I was the least invested person at the table. That made the win more enjoyable for me. When we played, one of our friends swapped out for me, and then something came up and he had to leave, so I swapped back in for him. So even though half the game I wasn't there for, we still somehow won, and I enjoyed that because I'm a troll.
That may sound like a knock on the game. It actually shows you just how difficult it is, that you could be playing the game the entire time. One of the times I played the game, halfway through the game I realized I'm doing terribly. Everyone acts like they know at least 3 of the 4 things. I know 1, and I'm screwed.
I've only played that once with y'all, and I thought it was great. I'm also a sucker for Days of Wonder, but I thought it was a fantastic game. It may be just a tad long to the point where I was starting to get a headache because it's so thinky and so brainy, but it was a really fun game.
But is it worth $200?
No.
Right, and I'm saying that most things aren't.
Right.
But I really wanted that game in my collection. Maybe I'm biased in favor of it because it's so sentimental to me because of how I got it. But that was a game I definitely regret not buying.
But now you have a better story for it, not buying it.
That's true. A game I don't have a better story for is Infinite City by AEG, and they're my favorite publisher. This is a game that I played several years ago that seems like the type of game that's perfect for me because it's a 6-player game where it actually worked as 6 players. And I don't remember a lot about it other than the fact that it's tile laying, and it seemed like a more economic version of Carcassonne. There's very little written about this game, and to the point where I had to ask someone who was there that night, what was the game we played? And he said, did you mean that game? And I had to go to great lengths to confirm the memory just to make sure I wasn't making this up. And I had a chance to get it at Gen Con at the thrift store. It would have been $40, but I was kind of hoping that I can get it for $30. I probably should have just spent the $10, even if it's just as a record of proving that memory happened. Sometimes, I mentioned that the most I ever spent on a single game was Mysterium, and I'd only played Infinite City once, but I should have trusted that, I liked the publisher. I had a good experience with the game. It's 6 players, which at the time, there were not a lot of 6-player games. I want to say that I don't even think King of Tokyo was out back then, and King of Tokyo is one of my favorite 6-player games. I should have trusted my gut. I would have had a chance to promote a game that not many people know about, and now I don't know when I'm going to see another copy of that. It's certainly, you can make an argument it wasn't worth $40. It's definitely not worth the $100 that people are asking for online. So some of you may be wondering, Dara and I were talking about how we kind of try and outsource making sure that someone else can buy the game that you want. If it's a game that you really enjoy, buy it. You want to be in control of your own collection. If someone moves away or if that copy gets destroyed, I get very nervous when I lend people to things because people have lost components and it can be a nightmare trying to get replacement parts. Certainly don't go out of your way to duplicate someone's collection, but if it's a game you really enjoy, then you should own it while you have the chance, because you may not have the chance. And then, fortunately for you, Justin, that still exists in your gaming circle. Most people I know hadn't even heard of Mystery Express or Infinite City.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
And certainly not Nightfall. Everyone I know who likes Nightfall was taught that game by me.
I'd say certainly my friend who ended up buying the copy of Arboretum just lives in Durham, but I don't feel like driving to Durham to play a game, so I wish I'd bought it. But again, it's not like a burning regret, because if I wanted to play it that badly, I would just drive to Durham.
Any other things you regret not buying?
That's actually about it for me. I'm a little bit with Dara on this. I feel like I already buy too many games as it is. So the few that I miss out on, I don't usually regret that much.
If anything, I feel like my list of games I regret buying could be longer, except for even games that I necessarily wouldn't add to my collection if I had to do over. Aren't games that I regret because they are games that I played and got some value, even if they're not games I enjoy. I bought them specifically for people who I knew would enjoy them and got the value out of them.
As someone who teaches routinely, I very often need specific games for certain circumstances, and so I don't mind purchasing things. It's really more of a storage thing, and yes, there's the time aspect of it as well. One example I just thought of again is a game by Reiner Knizia called Medici, and it's an auction game, and I do not like auction games. Can do a whole separate topic on why I think auction games don't always work. But I really like that designer, and I've heard great things about that game. And I've had several opportunities to buy it, including one apparently last week. And that was Medici was on my list of games to try before you buy, and I loved it. It does auction correctly, and I keep screwing up my chance to buy it. Next time, I'm definitely going to, just because that to me is a game that says this is how you introduce a mechanic to someone. For Sale is one of the other auction games I actually like, but that's your straightforward, raise the bid. There's some other interesting things in For Sale, but Medici completely changes how you view about that because you get one chance to assess something. If you say yeah, I'll bid 1, the next person can bid 2. If the other person passes, the person's getting it for 2. So you have to be I'm going to bid 12. Well, that's an overpay. Now you're stuck paying 12. Because you have only one chance, it completely changes your approach, and you have to say exactly how much you value it. And I love that about the game. So next time, if it's reprinted or if it comes my way and it's a reasonable price, I will purchase Medici. I do actually value it at about $30 or $35 because it's a 6-player game that can be played in a reasonable time. So another thing I regret not buying.
You mentioned storage space, and I think that's a good point. It might be a complete coincidence that I stopped buying so many games right after I had to move all my games from one location to another location, but that's when I started outsourcing to other people to get the games that I wanted to play, because who wants to move a bunch of board games around?
So the last thing I want to say on this subject is that collecting games is a lot of fun. We're going to be doing a game collection story one of these days, and I'm excited about that. But yes, there are regrets, but it's still worth taking chances. There are many more times. There are about 4 or 5 games that I regret. There are games that I regret not purchasing. But there are games that I'm so happy that I purchased because I took a chance. So regrets are fun to talk about, but don't let that deter you from actually making a purchase. It's important to know yourself, know what you like. I know I'm not a guy who likes to play 6-hour games with a ton of rules, even though I like to think so. Arkham Horror is not my game, and obviously I didn't consider buying that. But just be consistent in what you enjoy, and you'll have fewer regrets. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and this was Living the Lifestyle, and our game has just begun.